consort son was caught red-handed in an adulterous tryst with a rogue. Father Emperor lay on his sickbed, flying into a towering rage. He ordered all the imperial princes and princesses to be brought before him for a blood test to confirm paternity. Among the 5 princes and 3 princesses, not a single one's blood mingled with his, except mine. Oh, wow! A deathly hush fell over the imperial bedroom. I huddled in the corner, too terrified to even draw a full breath. Father Emperor leaned against the dragon bed, his face ashen and sallow, like a sheet of faded old paper, yet his eyes blazed with an eerie, piercing light, fixed unwaveringly on the bowl of clear water placed beside the bed. The eldest imperial brother stepped forward first. A drop of blood oozed from his fingertip. Falling into the bowl, it drifted apart from Father Emperor's dark crimson drop, a clear, uncrossable divide between them. A strange, almost eerie smile tugged at the corner of his ashen lips, as if he had expected nothing less. He waved a hand casually. Drag him down, bury him alive with his mother. The imperial guards moved with ruthless, unhesitating speed, stepping forward to haul him away at once. The eldest imperial brother seemed to want to scream, but only a short, gurgling whimper escaped his throat before his jaw was wrenched brutally out of place. Next came the second imperial brother. His blood dripped into the bowl, stubbornly refusing to merge with Father Emperor's as well. Father Emperor's sparse eyebrows twitched slightly. His murky eyes shifted to the captain of the guards, a single, subtle glance passing between them. Drag him down. Give him a white silk ribbon to end his life, along with his mother. All the color drained from the second imperial brother's face in an instant. His legs buckled beneath him, and he was half carried, half dragged out of the room by the guards. The bedroom fell into an even deeper silence, so profound that I could barely dare to breathe. Then came the 3rd, 4th, and 5th imperial brothers. Time and again, fresh drops of blood disturbed the surface of the water in the bowl, only to drift apart, refusing to blend. The faint smile vanished from Father Emperor's face. He did not even bother to speak, only growling a few broken syllables from deep in his throat. Tiger-tip red poison. Drag them out, behead them. Each order was shorter, sharper than the last. The method of execution escalated from the relatively honorable poison wine to beheading, a fate that left not even a whole corpse behind. The eldest and second imperial sisters were not spared either. When he saw that the second imperial sister's blood also refused to mingle with his, Father Emperor's emaciated chest heaved violently. He suddenly erupted into a fit of heart-wrenching, racking coughs. He curled up into a ball, his withered, twig-like fingers clutching the bright yellow brocade quilt tightly, the veins on the back of his hands standing out like cords. It took a long while for the coughing fit to subside. When he finally lifted his head, his voice was a harsh rasp. Behead her, at once. Drag her out. Behead her. The heavy palace door creaked open and shut, each time letting in a blast of the biting, bitter cold of the late autumn night. And each time carrying away the last remaining traces of warmth from the living in the room. Finally, it was my turn. The guards lurking in the shadows of the corner had already rested their hands on the hilts of their swords, their bodies tensed and leaning forward, ready to pounce and drag me away at any moment. I forced my trembling legs to carry me to the bowl of clear water. When the drop of my blood fell into the water, I did not even dare to open my eyes to look. They've merged. They've merged. They've merged. The sudden, shrill cry of Father Emperor's chief eunuch jolted me into opening my eyes. In the bowl, my bright red drop of blood was slowly, inexorably blending with Father Emperor's dark, almost blackened drop. Your Majesty, they've merged. The 3rd imperial princess. The 3rd imperial princess is your biological daughter. She's your flesh and blood. The chief eunuch threw himself prostrate at the foot of the dragon bed, overcome with such excitement that he stammered incoherently, tears and snot streaming down his face. Ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. Father Emperor let out a gale of wild, triumphant laughter. The effort of laughing wrenched his failing, decaying internal organs, triggering another earth-shaking fit of coughing. Yet the rage and madness in his eyes receded like a tide, replaced by nothing but wild, unbridled joy and absolute certainty. I knew it, he laughed through his coughing fits. murky old tears trickling down his sunken eye sockets. I knew it, your mother would never betray me, never. I opened my mouth. The question that almost burst forth was swallowed back down hard. My mother? Did he even remember who my mother was? Father Emperor's laughter gradually died down, his gasping breaths evening out a little. He raised his emaciated, trembling finger with great effort, pointing toward the imperial desk. His voice was a mere thread of breath. Draft the edict. Appoint the third imperial princess as crown princess, my heir. The chief eunuch scrambled on all fours to the imperial desk, his hands shaking violently as he spread out a roll of bright yellow silk brocade. And one more thing. Father Emperor's gaze turned to me with great difficulty, his hand waving weakly twice. The token of the hidden guards. Give it to her. The leader of the hidden guards stepped forward silently, taking a pitch-black token the size of a palm from his bosom. He held it high above his head with both hands, presenting it to me with deep reverence. I reached out and gripped the token firmly in my hand. Good, good. Father Emperor watched me clench the token tightly. The last traces of tension melted away from his face, a flicker of relief passing through his murky eyes. He let out a long, final breath, leaning back against the tall, bright yellow soft pillows of the dragon bed, his ashen face relaxed, almost peacefully, in a strange twist. Then he closed his eyes, never to open them again. To be on the safe side. The first thing I did after obtaining the token was not to arrange Father Emperor's funeral, but to order the hidden guards to secretly bring the eldest imperial brother's maternal uncle into the palace that very night. The night was still pitch black, deep and heavy. It was not long before the palace door creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air. Two hidden guards dragged a middle-aged man dressed in his sleeping robes into the room, his hands and feet tightly bound. They threw him roughly to the floor with a thud. He struggled to lift his head, his face contorted with shock and anger, the last vestiges of sleep still lingering in his eyes. His hair was disheveled, but his eyes remained sharp, radiating the arrogant air of a man who had held a high position for many years. Even in his current state of utter disarray, third imperial princess, he recognized me, his brows furrowing deeply, his voice ringing with anger at the outrage he had suffered. What is the meaning of this? How dare you send men to kidnap a high-ranking minister of the court in the middle of the night? Does your majesty know about this outrageous behavior of yours? He was still trying to threaten me, clearly unaware of what had transpired in the palace. Of course he was. Father Emperor had passed away so suddenly that the news had probably not yet reached outside the palace walls. I reclined lazily on a soft couch, waving a hand casually to signal the hidden guards to untie him. He rubbed his wrists, where deep red marks from the ropes had been left behind. He stood up, looking down at me from his towering height, his eyes filled with scrutiny and disdain. I did not meet his gaze, only lowering my head to toy with the token in my hand. Before his death, Father Emperor had a sudden whim. He summoned all my siblings and me to his bedside for a blood test to confirm paternity. And the result, Lord Xianxia. Guess what? I lifted my head, grinning at him. The eldest imperial brother's blood failed to merge with Father Emperor's. Don't you think that's fascinating? I watched, crystal clear, as the color drained from Xianxia's face in a split second, his pupils contracting sharply, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down as he swallowed hard. But he was a man of profound self-control and deep cunning. That moment of shock lasted only an instant before it was forcibly suppressed, replaced by a deeper, darker look of malice and wariness. Preposterous, he roared, his voice thundering with rage. Third imperial princess, cease your nonsensical ramblings at once. Stop spreading these malicious lies. The blood test is nothing but an absurdity. How could your majesty possibly? Father Emperor believed it. I cut him off coolly. He laughed then, and said, drag him down, bury him alive with his mother. Xianxia's body swayed violently, his face turning ashen and sallow, exactly like a corpse. His lips trembled violently, but not a single word managed to escape them. In those once arrogant eyes, the emotion called fear was now clearly reflected. But then again, I shifted the subject abruptly, the smile on my face widening a little. I am a kind-hearted person. I cannot bear to see bloodshed among kinsmen. Let alone bear to see such good people as the eldest imperial brother and noble consort you suffocated to death in the cold earth. I savored the deepening look of disbelief and suspicion in his eyes, continuing slowly, so I had them dug out of the pit. Right now, the eldest imperial brother and noble consort you are resting safely in the palace. They're badly shaken, of course, but they're still breathing. Xianxia stared at me, his chest heaving violently, as if he were struggling to judge whether my words were true or false. Lord Xian, do you think I'm spouting nonsense? Or perhaps I should have them brought here right now, so you can see for yourself. Watching the cold sweat bead on his forehead, I added slowly, applying more pressure, if they're too terrified to speak, or if you think they've been coerced by me, that's not a problem either. We can always conduct another blood test, this time. We won't test anyone else, just the eldest imperial brother and you, Lord Xian. If his blood should happen to merge with yours, now that would be truly fascinating. Enough, Xianxia roared suddenly, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white, as if he would pounce on me and tear me to pieces in the next second, but he did not dare to move. The hidden guards behind him had already pressed the blades of their swords to his neck, after taking several deep, ragged breaths. Xianxia finally managed to suppress the turbulent rage surging within him. Third Imperial Princess, what exactly are you trying to achieve? I wiped all traces of a smile from my face, leaning forward slightly, my voice cold and sharp. I want to be emperor. Xianxia's pupils dilated to their absolute limit. As if he had just heard the most absurd and terrifying words in the world, he stared at me, as if looking at a monster. You are a princess. How can you? I leaned back against the soft couch again, propping my chin up with one hand, which is why, when the time comes, I will have to trouble you, Lord Xian, to lend me your support. A deathly silence fell over the room, broken only by Xianxia's heavy, suppressed gasps for breath and the howling of the wind outside the window. After a long while, all the strength seemed to drain from his body. He sank to one knee before me. Your subject obeys your command. 3. Xianxia's figure vanished silently beyond the heavy palace door. I did not linger any longer. Rising to my feet and leaving the room, I walked along the palace corridors, silent and eerie as a tomb, heading for the Empress's bedroom. The Empress was still awake, reclining on a soft couch padded with thick brocade cushions, a scroll of books in her hands. She did not lift her head at the sound of my footsteps, her gaze remaining fixed on the pages of her book. It was not until I reached her side that she turned a page slowly, still not looking up, asking in a cool, detached tone, "You've come back so late, have you finished taking care of everything?" I sat down on an embroidered stool beside her, drawing close to her. A faint, soothing scent of sandalwood wafted from the couch cushions. I nodded, relaxing my body slightly, leaning against the edge of the couch. "Yes," I replied, my gaze falling on the flickering candle flame. Before Father Emperor passed away, he took my hand, tears streaming down his face, and said, "I knew it, your mother would never betray me." I let out a cold, mocking laugh, turning my head to look at the Empress's calm, unflinching face. How ridiculous, Mother Empress. Do you think he still remembered who my mother was? The Empress's hand paused mid-turn of the page. At long last, she lifted her eyes, letting out a cold, mocking laugh. "Does it matter whether he remembered your mother or not?" Indeed, it didn't matter much at all. My mother, the blurry yet gentle face in my memory, was nothing more than a quiet, deft little maid in the Empress's palace. Like all the other palace maids, she had no distinguishing features to speak of. She was like the most unremarkable little flower in the imperial garden, just waiting to reach the age of 25, when she would be released from the palace walls to live the ordinary, peaceful life she had longed for all her life. But on that fateful day, the aging emperor, having drunk far too much wine at some palace feast, stumbled unsteadily into the Empress's palace. The Empress had just left for the Buddha Hall. The emperor, his eyes clouded with drunkenness, was like a beast driven by base desire. His gaze swept across the hall, finally settling on the little maid huddled in the corner, trembling with fear. What happened next need not be elaborated on. The cries and struggles of a lowly palace maid were as faint as the buzz of a mosquito before the supreme power of the imperial throne. Later, a similarly lowly imperial princess was born. Though her mother had tried her best to protect her, she eventually wasted away her last breath in humiliation, on her deathbed, with her final strength. My mother pressed my hand into the empress's, who had rushed over upon hearing the news. The empress, who had no children of her own, took me in naturally and raised me as her own. She closed the scroll in her hand, her tone remaining calm as ever. Everyone who knows about this matter must be dealt with, especially that chief eunuch by your father's side. He has served your father for so long, it is only fitting that he go down to accompany him now, the chief eunuch by father emperor's side. Speaking of which, I should also thank him, if he hadn't tampered with the water for the blood test, and if he hadn't kept whispering in father emperor's ear, who had grown increasingly suspicious due to his severe illness, about the unsavory affairs in the courtiers' backyards, things would not have gone so smoothly. I am not an ungrateful person, after all. Then I shall have all the gold and silver I gave him buried with him as an offering, and I shall have his nephew, whom I managed to track down with great difficulty, weep bitterly for him at his funeral, so bitterly that it would be remembered for ages to come. After returning to my bedroom, I summoned the leader of the hidden guards. 2 matters, I said, tapping the table lightly with my fingers. First, find a way to leak the results of the blood test to the maternal families of the various imperial consorts. Remember, be vague and indirect. There is no need to state it explicitly, so as to avoid leaving any handles that could be seized by others. Second, on the pretext that the imperial mausoleum needs to be guarded against spies taking advantage of the late emperor's funeral to fish in troubled waters, replace all the palace guards. Transfer all the guard captains who were close to the various princes and princesses out of the palace immediately. As for the vacancies, select some clever and reliable men from your hidden guards to fill them, or use the people recommended by the empress. The leader of the hidden guards bowed to receive the order, then slipped silently into the gradually brightening dawn. In the days that followed, the empress and I presided over father emperor's funeral together. The edict to replace the palace guards was implemented smoothly. After all, now, no external forces could reach into the palace, and inside the palace, there were no more people left to oppose us. Those vague yet terrifying rumors were more than enough to stir up waves of panic that only the occupants of those noble mansions could hear in their tightly shut studies. There was no need for the hidden guards to report back to me. I could imagine perfectly well how those once arrogant fathers-in-law and maternal uncles of the imperial family were now sitting opposite each other, their faces ashen and pale, unable to speak a single word. And how they were burning all night the letters and documents that might prove their close ties with the imperial consorts and princes. Time seemed to pass quickly amid the busyness and oppression, and finally, the day of Father Emperor's grand funeral arrived. The mourning hall was set up in the Hall of Heavenly Primacy. The massive coffin stood in the center of the hall, and the thick scent of incense and candles made even breathing feel difficult. Civil and military officials knelt in a dark mass on the ground, their cries rising one after another, some genuine, some fake, an unbearably noisy commotion. Dressed in heavy mourning robes, I knelt at the very front of the coffin, my head bowed, my shoulders trembling slightly, looking utterly grief-stricken. The shrill voice of the edict-reading eunuch rang out above the chorus of weeping, when he read out the imperial edict appointing me as the crown princess and heir to the throne. A moment of deathly silence fell over the mourning hall. Then, it was as if a drop of water had been splashed into a boiling pan. An uproar erupted. Absurd. An elderly minister with graying hair suddenly raised his head, tears still glistening on his face. But his expression was filled with indignation as he glared at me. The third imperial princess is neither the legal wife's daughter nor the eldest. Moreover, she is a woman. When a hen crows at dawn, it spells misfortune for the family. This is an ancient maxim, as clear as day. How can it be violated? Precisely, another man chimed in, his voice filled with righteous anger. Furthermore, the third imperial princess's birthmother was of lowly origin. How can such a lineage be worthy of inheriting the ancestral temple and the state? There must be something fishy about the late emperor's decision. Your subject dares to speak up. The late emperor passed away suddenly, though he had been ailing. It was not an incurable illness. Why did all the other imperial princes and princesses die overnight? And why was the third imperial princess the only one left unscathed? Your subject implores your highness to thoroughly investigate the circumstances surrounding the late emperor's passing, so as to calm the hearts of the people under heaven. Many of the ministers who had been prostrate on the ground weeping now raised their heads, their eyes darting about, whispering to each other. In the morning hall, there was an unmistakable air of a palace coup brewing. I lifted my head, my face streaked with tears, my voice choked with sobs. Father Emperor has already ascended to immortality. There are some things that I, as his daughter, had intended to bury deep in my heart forever, to rot away, afraid that if I spoke of them, I would sully Father Emperor's lifelong reputation and bring him unrest, even in death. My eyes reddened further as I scanned the faces before me, some filled with doubt, some with indifference, some waiting to watch the show. But now, since all of you lords are pressing me so relentlessly, questioning Father Emperor's final will, then I have no choice but to tell the truth. Enough. A thunderous roar suddenly shattered the air of the morning hall, silencing all voices instantly. Everyone stared in stunned disbelief. There, standing slowly from the front ranks of the military officials who had been kneeling silently all along, was Xianxia. His face was ashen with rage, his eyes, usually filled with arrogance and shrewdness, now blazing with terrifying fury as he fixed his gaze on the elderly minister who had spoken first. Xianxia Chen, the late emperor's coffin lies before us, and the ink on his imperial edict is not yet dry. Yet here you are, shouting loudly in the morning hall, questioning the late emperor's final command, and even hurling insults at the soon-to-be-crowned new sovereign. He strode forward step by step, his imposing aura pressing down on the Xianxia like a mountain. What is your ulterior motive? Do you wish to disturb the late emperor's eternal rest? Do you wish to throw our court into turmoil? Do you wish to make the people under heaven laugh at the discord between our sovereign and his ministers? You prattle on about rituals and rules, but I ask you, does your conduct conform to the proper decorum expected of a subject of the imperial court? Does it repay the grace and favor the late emperor bestowed upon you in his lifetime? Intimidated by Xianxia's imposing manner, Xianxia Chen's face flushed red and then turned pale, his mouth opening and closing. Unable to utter a single word in his defense, Xianxia's sudden outburst was like a bucket of ice-cold water, dousing the surging momentum of the ministers' rebellion. The ministers exchanged glances, none of them expecting Xianxia, who held military power over the capital and had always been a loyal supporter of the eldest imperial brother, to step forward at this critical juncture and defend me so fiercely. Just then, the chief eunuch, who had been standing respectfully beside Father Emperor's coffin all along, also dressed in heavy mourning, suddenly collapsed to the ground with a loud thud. He lifted his head, his face streaming with tears, a trickle of black blood seeping from the corner of his mouth. All of you lords, this old servant has served the late emperor for 43 years. That imperial edict was dictated by the late emperor himself. In his clear and lucid mind, this old servant watched with his own eyes as His Majesty wrote it down and stamped it with his imperial seal. He broke into a violent fit of coughing, blood frothing from his lips continuously, his body swaying unsteadily, yet he clung stubbornly to his half-kneeling position, refusing to fall. The late emperor once said, though he had many children, only the third imperial princess had eyes and a way of doing things that resembled his own in his youth. The cold treatment he gave her in the past was nothing more than a test of her character. His gaze turned toward me with great difficulty. After seeing me nod slightly, he summoned his last remaining strength and screamed toward Father Emperor's coffin at the top of his lungs, "Your Majesty, this old servant is coming to accompany you now." His final cry was shrill and piercing. Cutting off abruptly, he remained frozen in his half-kneeling position. His head tilted upward, his eyes wide open, staring in the direction of the coffin, blood snaking down his chin. He was already dead. A deathly silence descended over the morning hall. broken only by the north wind howling through the cracks in the hall doors, emitting a low, mournful wail. I stared blankly at the old eunuch's corpse, unable to utter a single word for a moment. I had promised this old eunuch that if he acted out this final scene well, his nephew would inherit the title of nobility I had promised him, and live a life of great wealth and prosperity, safe and sound until his old age. Now it seemed that he had acted his part flawlessly, so flawlessly that it even stirred a tiny, insignificant sigh in my heart. At this moment, the Empress also turned around, her face haggard, and looked at the ministers. The late Emperor's final will is witnessed by heaven and earth, all of you ministers, now that things have come to this pass. Do any of you still have any objections? What more objections could there be? Even if they had objections, they had already been proven wrong by the old eunuch's life, not to mention that Xianxia was still standing there, glaring at them, and the guards posted inside and outside the morning hall had their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. Several of the elderly ministers who had shouted the loudest just now had ashen faces, their lips trembling, but in the end, they only bowed their heads deeply. The rest of the ministers fell into complete silence, even suppressing their sobs out of self-awareness. I lowered my eyes, unable to resist a cold smile. This was the nature of power. Strip away all the flowery rhetoric and hypocritical rituals, and what remained was nothing more than reason and might. The elaborate procedures of the imperial funeral finally came to an end. 1 month later, the coronation ceremony was held. The ceremonial music was solemn and grand, the imperial procession magnificent and imposing. Dressed in a specially modified dragon-patterned imperial robe, I ascended the high platform step by step. Beneath my feet was the vermilion imperial path. On either side resounded the thunderous shouts of "Long live the Emperor." I sat down on that cold, hard dragon throne, looking down at the civil and military officials prostrating themselves on the ground like a stagnant pool of colorful water. The Empress, now the Empress Dowager, sat behind a curtain of beaded curtains, her figure blurry and indistinct. I raised my hand, palm facing downward, and pressed it gently. All of you ministers may rise. The officials stood up, countless gazes converging on me from all directions. I met those gazes head-on, my face expressionless, but my heart knew clearly that within those shouts of "Long live the Emperor" were contained countless feelings of unwillingness and countless schemes. Those elderly ministers had only temporarily submitted to the established fact before their eyes, the Empress Dowager's maternal clan. They were not supporting me, they were supporting the Empress Dowager, and the future glory that might be brought to the maternal relatives of the imperial family. As for those hidden guards who lurked in the shadows, they were useful and hidden so well that not even the Empress Dowager knew of their existence. Obeying only the orders given with the token in my hand, but they could not stand in this imperial court and speak on my behalf. I was still a lonely person, sitting on the highest throne, with the cold wind blowing fiercely all around me. Once the initial chaos following my ascension to the throne subsided, state affairs seemed to proceed in an orderly fashion. Memorials flooded the imperial desk like snowflakes, most dealing with trivial administrative matters. While the real levers of power in the court were tacitly divided and controlled by several factions, this couldn't go on. I needed men I could truly call my own, men who had studied my classics, passed my examinations, owed their positions to my grace, and whose hearts and minds held only me, their sovereign. On the day of the morning court session, after discussing a few inconsequential issues, I spoke up. Since ascending the throne, I have often felt that governing a nation requires capable men. To demonstrate the court's resolve for reform and to extend favor to scholars across the realm, I hereby decree the opening of a special imperial examination, a supplementary spring session. All aspiring scholars with lofty ambitions may journey to the capital to sit for the exams this year. Silence descended upon the hall the moment my words faded. Then, several elderly ministers with white hair and beards exchanged glances. The imperial examination was a matter of national significance. Held once every 3 years with strict protocols, yet it was not unheard of for a new emperor to institute a special examination upon ascending the throne only. Your Majesty, an elderly minister in charge of the Ministry of Rites stepped forward. The opening of a special examination is indeed a grand gesture that will benefit the scholarly community. However, this year is not a scheduled examination year. Rushing to hold it may lead to inadequate preparations, which would tarnish the court's dignity. It would be more prudent to make thorough arrangements and hold it next year. Minister Li speaks with great wisdom, someone immediately echoed. Furthermore, a special examination entails substantial expenses. With the national mourning period having just concluded, the state treasury, I cut him off, turning my gaze to the Minister of Revenue. I reviewed the Ministry of Revenue's report just yesterday. Last year's grain taxes, salt, and iron revenues showed no major deficits. How stands the state treasury at present? Sweat broke out on the Minister of Revenue's forehead as he hesitated, stammering, Your Majesty, the treasury is indeed adequate. It's just that holding the exam in such haste might compromise our dignity. If the treasury is adequate, then there is no issue, I said, withdrawing my gaze. As for dignity, allowing scholars of genuine talent across the realm to avoid wasting their years waiting for the triennial exam and to serve the nation at the earliest opportunity, that is the greatest dignity of all. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. My decision is final, no further discussion is needed. My eyes swept over Shen Wei, who stood with his gaze fixed on his nose and his mind on his heart, uttering not a word. I then glanced at several senior ministers from aristocratic clans whose disciples and old associates permeated the court and military. Their faces bore varying degrees of disapproval, yet none dared to voice their opposition further. First, my reasoning was dignified and lofty, making it difficult to refute outright. Second, none of the ministers present took this special examination seriously. What sort of decent talent could be selected from a hastily organized exam? When no sons of aristocratic families participated, it would be the court, not them, that would lose face. Sure enough, after the imperial edict was issued, undercurrents swirled in the capital. The city's largest tea houses and restaurants became hubs for exchanging news. Have you heard? For this special examination, the prominent aristocratic clans have secretly instructed their sons not to take part. Of course, they claim it's too hasty and undignified, but in truth, they look down on our empress and refuse to let their young lords come and lend her their support. Hush, speak carefully. Do you want to lose your head? What's there to fear? The law does not punish the multitude. Besides, the more they refuse to participate, the better for us. We scholars who have studied hard for years but been barred from official careers due to our humble backgrounds, this is finally our chance. Well said, brother. By opening this special examination, Her Majesty disregards social status and promotes only talent. This is the path to advancement for us common-born scholars. Naturally, my secret guards reported every whisper of these conversations to me word for word. After listening, I merely smiled and returned to reviewing memorials. This was exactly as I had intended. I had never wanted the sons of aristocratic clans, whose interests were deeply intertwined with their families and who cared more for clan power than for the court. What I wanted were those humble scholars who had been excluded from the orthodox paths of promotion, men brimming with talent but denied the opportunity to display it, men who would have no choice but to cling tightly to me, their only lifeline. Only they, once they entered the court, would stand unwaveringly by my side. Preparations for the special examination proceeded at a rapid pace. Though hasty, they were carried out in a proper and orderly manner. When spring arrived, the examination period dawned. Outside the imperial examination hall, the scholars queuing for entry inspections wore far plainer clothes than those who had sat for the regular examinations in previous years. I stood atop the tallest watchtower in the palace, gazing in the direction of the examination hall from afar. I knew that these men might well become the first batch of ministers in the court who truly belonged to me. I hoped that among them, there would be those who could write essays that would truly catch my eye. Turning to descend the tower, I instructed the eunuch attending me, once the examinations are over, seal all the answer sheets and deliver them directly to the imperial study. I will personally review every single one. On the day the results of the special examination were posted, the imperial bulletin board was thronged with a dense crowd. the number of names on the pass list was small. So few that they could be written on a single sheet of yellow paper. Compared to the grand spectacle of hundreds of successful candidates in regular years, it looked particularly shabby. Moreover, from top to bottom, not a single surname belonged to any of the prominent clans of the current dynasty. When the news spread, it brought joy to some and disappointment to others. Naturally, the successful candidates from humble backgrounds were overjoyed. Meanwhile, the majority of those who had failed, along with the aristocratic clans who had stood idly by, after their initial surprise, wore expressions of knowing disdain. Just as they had expected, a hastily organized examination, personally reviewed by a female empress. What sort of decent talent could it possibly select? These were nothing but incompetent mediocrities who had passed by sheer luck. Her Majesty's action was clearly nothing more than a face-saving farce. Soon afterward, the arrangements for appointing these new Xianxia were duly presented to the court for discussion. Without the slightest hesitation, I followed the minister's recommendations, assigning most of the successful candidates to remote border regions. The few who remained in the capital were given idle posts with no real power. My ready compliance seemed to put some people in the hall at ease, and the glimmer of contempt in their eyes deepened a little more. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the court grew increasingly lax. During discussions of state affairs, several senior ministers would occasionally contradict me outright, citing classics and expounding at length, often concluding with the remark, "Your Majesty is still young." Yet the Empress Dowager's faction fell silent. Beyond the daily mandatory greetings, she refrained from interfering further in my affairs. Perhaps, in her eyes, this was the ideal state of affairs. Meanwhile, her maternal clan had become increasingly active in both the court and the military in recent times, placing their clansmen in key positions and cultivating ties with military commanders, their influence growing by leaps and bounds. Everything seemed to be moving in the direction the ministers had anticipated. The new empress was weak and easily manipulated, and this court would ultimately remain theirs. Then came that day, a seemingly ordinary court session. After discussing several matters regarding the Ministry of Revenue's grain and fund allocations, Shen Wei suddenly stepped forward from the ranks of ministers. "Your servant, Shen Wei, has a memorial to present. Your servant accuses General Zhao Wu Heji, captain of the elite cavalry He Chong, director of the military selection department of the Ministry of War He Ming, and others. During their tenure in the military, they colluded in embezzlement, trafficked in military supplies, siphoned off soldiers' salaries, and undermined the laws and discipline of the realm. Their crimes deserve the death penalty." A deathly hush fell over the hall in an instant. General Zhao Wu Heji, captain of the elite cavalry He Chong, director of the military selection department He Ming. These names, they were the most outstanding young talents of the He clan, the Empress Dowager's maternal family, and the core pillars of the He clan's current power in the military. Hadn't the Shen clan and the He clan always coexisted peacefully without interfering in each other's affairs? Why would this happen so suddenly? Behind the beaded curtain, the Empress Dowager's face turned ashen. Several officials aligned with the He clan in the court immediately spoke up to refute Shen Wei. "Minister Shen, how dare you hurl such slanderous accusations?" One of the He clan's disciples even jumped out on the spot, pointing at Shen Wei, his whole body trembling with anger. "General He and his colleagues have served the nation with unwavering loyalty and achieved remarkable military feats. How dare you falsely accuse them? You produce evidence." Shen Wei paid him no heed, merely drawing a set of account books from his sleeve. "Your servant has already obtained conclusive evidence. During his garrison duty, Heji falsified the number of troops by 3,000, embezzling a total of 187,000 taels of military pay over the years. He Chong, in the capital garrison, Shen Wei spoke with meticulous detail, citing specifics that even some of the He clan's closest confidants present might not have known. This was no impulsive move, it was a scheme long in the making. Your servant has in his possession all the material evidence, witness testimonies, and copies of the account books, Shen Wei finally concluded, dropping to his knees in a deep kowtow. "Your Majesty, the military is the backbone of the nation. the foundation of the state. These vermin, entrenched in the military, feed on the blood of our soldiers and shake the very foundations of our country. If they are not severely punished, how can we rectify military discipline? How can we face the soldiers who lay down their lives defending the borders? Your servant earnestly implores your majesty to issue an imperial edict for a thorough investigation, to immediately arrest He Ji, He Chong, He Ming, and all others involved in this case, and to hand them over to the joint trial of the 3 judicial departments. The hall was utterly silent. Everyone was stunned by this sudden turn of events, their eyes darting back and forth between Shen Wei and the beaded curtain. I frowned slightly, my gaze instinctively turning toward the Empress Dowager behind the curtain. Minister Shen, are you absolutely certain of your accusations? The He clan has been loyal to the nation for generations, and the Empress Dowager is, Your Majesty. Shen Wei suddenly lifted his head, his voice ringing with the resolve of a man who had burned his bridges. Precisely because this involves the Empress Dowager's maternal clan, it is all the more imperative that we get to the bottom of this matter. If they are innocent, we shall clear their names. Demonstrating Your Majesty's and the Empress Dowager's impartiality and integrity, and their refusal to indulge personal favoritism. If they are guilty, then they deserve nothing less than the harshest punishment as a warning to others. Otherwise, where is the majesty of the law? Where is the morale of the military? With every mention of impartiality and integrity and a warning to others, Shen Wei placed both the Empress Dowager and me on the spot. If I shielded them, I would be a muddle-headed ruler who indulged favoritism, betraying the soldiers. If the Empress Dowager obstructed the investigation, it would be seen as her maternal clan abusing their power and interfering in state affairs. I fell silent for a long while, my gaze sweeping over the ministers below, each wearing a different expression, before landing on the Empress Dowager. At last, I made up my mind. Minister Shen speaks with great reason. Matters of military and state importance brook no leniency, since there is both material evidence and witness testimony. We shall act in accordance with Minister Shen's memorial and launch a thorough investigation. All those involved, regardless of their status, shall be placed in custody first. We shall await the full clarification of the truth before pronouncing judgment. Long live Your Majesty, the wise and enlightened ruler. Shen Wei knocked his head heavily against the ground. Your Majesty, you cannot do this. Several officials of the He clan threw themselves to their knees, weeping bitterly. I rose to my feet, paying them no further heed, and simply said, Court is dismissed. Before departing in haste, the Empress Dowager and I went together to her sinning palace. Her face, which always maintained an air of regal composure, finally darkened completely. Shen Wei, he has gone too far. I took 2 steps forward, hesitated for a moment, then voiced my suspicion. Shen Wei, could it be that with the late emperor gone and the crown prince still alive, he has begun to harbor other ambitions? The Empress Dowager suddenly lifted her eyes, fixing them directly on me. I did not flinch, meeting her gaze calmly. Mother Empress, should we bring up the matter of the blood test for the crown prince? The glint of scrutiny and suspicion faded slightly from the Empress Dowager's eyes. She looked at me, the corners of her lips curving upward faintly. There is no need to go that far just yet. After all, for the sake of your father's honor, we still need to cover this up for him. Seeing the look of confusion on my face, a hint of a smile finally appeared in the Empress Dowager's eyes. Does Shen Wei think that with a living crown prince, his Shen clan has something to hope for? If that is the case, then we shall simply dash those hopes of his completely. She did not specify exactly what she planned to do, but the murderous intent in her words was unmistakable. I lowered my eyelashes, nodding obediently. The Empress Dowager seemed satisfied with my attitude. She leaned back against her chair, closed her eyes, and fell silent. After a long while, she slowly opened her eyes, her face having regained its usual calm composure. You may return to your palace to rest first. As for matters in the court, this old woman and several veteran ministers will handle the negotiations. You need only keep a steady mind. I bowed respectfully, assuming a humble posture. Your daughter takes her leave. Stepping out of the hall, the palanquin waiting for me on the veranda was quickly carried over. I climbed aboard, and the curtains were drawn, blocking out the light and the view. The palanquin was lifted steadily, heading toward the direction of my sleeping quarters. Just as the palanquin rounded the corner of the palace wall and the Empress Dowager's palace gate was about to disappear from sight, I suddenly raised my hand, gently lifting a corner of the curtain, and glanced once more at the closed vermilion gate. Then, with extreme softness, I placed my hand flat against my abdomen. A few nights earlier, in the dead of night, I had secretly summoned Xianxia. Without beating around the bush, I had asked him a single question: "Minister Shen, can you guess whose child is in my womb?" Xianxia's head shot up in shock. "Why, Your Majesty, you and the Crown Prince are brother and sister." As I smiled meaningfully, the look of surprise and doubt in Xianxia's eyes slowly faded away. I and the Crown Prince shared no blood ties. There would be no issue with me carrying his child. At present, the He clan was pressing forward relentlessly, even extending their claws into the military. The only thing they relied on was the woman sitting behind the beaded curtain, and now, I was with child, a child still in my womb, a child whose mother could be discarded while the child was kept, a child who carried the blood of his Shen clan. Xianxia stood there, his eyes fixed intently on my hand resting on my abdomen, his expression flickering with a myriad of emotions. After a long while, he slowly knelt down before me, his posture displaying a deference never seen before. "Your servant shall obey Your Majesty's orders in all things." The Empress Dowager moved with ruthless speed. Within days, word reached me that the Crown Prince and noble consort who had died suddenly and violently. Xianxia knew of this, yet he chose to remain silent. Truly laughable. So-called blood ties, so-called kinship, when pitted against sufficient interests, they were no more than a wisp of wind, light and fleeting, gone in an instant. But it was not long after this incident that the He clan found themselves on the receiving end of a ruthless counterattack from the Shen clan. Leading his faction of censors and military officers, Xianxia launched an unrelenting offensive against the He clan, dragging every misdeed they had committed in the military out into the harsh light of day. The evidence was irrefutable, the accusations damning. Every morning court session became a public execution of the He clan's reputation. The foundations the He clan had painstakingly built in the military crumbled at a visible pace under the Shen clan's all-out assault. Generals were dismissed and investigated, loyalists purged from the camps. The vacated positions were quickly filled by other commanders loyal to the Shen clan, and for some posts, the Shen clan would rather appoint obscure officers from humble backgrounds than leave them to the He clan. But this was not enough. The Shen clan's offensive soon spread from the military to the court itself. Several civil officials with close ties to the He clan were impeached one after another. Their crimes, while not as fatal as the embezzlement in the military, were more than enough to leave them distracted and discredited. Naturally, the He clan refused to sit idly by and await their fate. The Empress Dowager's expression grew darker by the day. Even through the beaded curtain, I could feel her anger and coldness. Almost tangible, the He clan had cultivated their influence for years, with disciples and old associates scattered throughout the court and military. Their counterattack was fierce. If the Shen clan impeached a He clan minister today, there would be a censor impeaching a Shen clan border general tomorrow. The two sides clashed endlessly, their words growing more intense, their accusations more shocking. Before long, the conflict drew in not just them, but every other faction in the court as well. This chaotic melee dragged on for nearly a month. The court became a cesspool of intrigue, with officials coming and going, everyone living in fear yet everyone looking for an opportunity to tear a piece of flesh from their rivals. Even the Empress Dowager, who had always remained unshakable, could finally contain herself no longer. The rumors first emerged from the filthiest corners of the capital's alleyways. At first, they were just vague whispers, but they quickly evolved into vivid, salacious tales. "Have you heard? That noble consort she wasn't even Minister Shen's biological sister. She was adopted from outside when she was a child, raised in the inner chambers just so. TSK. No wonder. I said she gained the late emperor's favor the moment she entered the palace, and the Shen clan's fortunes rose right along with hers. So this is what was behind it all. That's not even the half of it. Haven't you heard about him the crown prince? Why, his looks. His mannerisms, he doesn't resemble the late emperor at all, look closely, and he bears a striking resemblance to Minister Xian himself. Oh my goodness, this is truly an outrage against the imperial harem, a contamination of the imperial bloodline. This is a crime punishable by the extermination of 9 clans. The rumors spread like wildfire, fanned by the He clan's covert agitation, engulfing the entire capital within days. Eventually, this fire burned its way into the court. Your servant. Your servant has a memorial to present. Rumors have been swirling through the streets and alleys recently, all claiming that the late noble consort you had an illicit relationship with Minister Xianxia, and that the crown prince's bloodline is questionable. Such slanderous words are hardly worthy of belief, yet their poisonous influence spreads far and wide, tarnishing the imperial family's reputation. Your servant earnestly implores your majesty to launch a thorough investigation. To set the record straight and calm the hearts of the people under heaven. No sooner had the words been spoken than several more officials stepped forward to echo the sentiment, their tones sincere, as if they truly acted only for the sake of the imperial family's honor. Xianxia stood among the military officers. His eyes were fixed on the censor, then slowly shifted to the indistinct figure behind the beaded curtain. The Empress Dowager's voice rang out, "Wise men pay no heed to rumors. Yet this concerns the late emperor's reputation and the purity of the imperial bloodline, matters of the utmost gravity. Since doubts have been raised, to avoid criticism from future generations, an investigation is indeed in order. However, both the crown prince and noble consort you are already deceased, with no witnesses to question. How are we to conduct this investigation?" The censor was well prepared, answering smoothly, "Your Majesty, Your Highness the Empress Dowager. The asterisk records of forensic medicine asterisk states that the blood of close relatives can seep into each other's bones. Though the crown prince is deceased, his remains still lie in the imperial mausoleum." Presumptuous, Xianxia could contain himself no longer. He stepped forward abruptly, his voice thundering. The crown prince was of the late emperor's blood, a member of the imperial family. How dare you disturb his rest after death and subject him to such humiliation? You have listened to baseless gossip from the streets, framed loyal ministers, and slandered the imperial family. What punishment do you think you deserve for this? Whether it is baseless gossip, we shall know once we have conducted the test, the Empress Dowager said, her voice steady. Minister Xian, your outburst, could it be that you have a guilty conscience? Your servant. Xianxia's chest heaved violently, veins bulging on his forehead, yet in the end, he had no words to say. A temporary shed was erected beside the imperial mausoleum, draped with heavy curtains. Several elderly imperial clansmen, officials from the Ministry of Justice and the Court of Judicial Review, and Xianxia himself were all present. The soil was dug up, and the crown prince's coffin was lifted out. Fortunately, the princes, princesses, and consorts had all been buried in haste, so the exhumation did not take long. Inside the coffin, the crown prince's face was already unrecognizable, judging by the state of decomposition. The He clan had clearly tampered with the body. Xianxia's expression was beyond grim. He stared fixedly at the skeleton, saying not a word. Minister Xian, if you please. A eunuch by the Empress Dowager's side approached him, holding a silver knife. All eyes in the shed were fixed on him. Xianxia's hand trembled. He slowly raised it, took the silver knife, and made a small cut on his fingertip. Beads of blood welled up. Another eunuch carefully presented a section of the crown prince's arm bone on a piece of clean white cloth. Under the gaze of countless eyes, a single drop of blood slowly seeped into the bone. It's seeping in. Someone cried out first, their voice filled with horror. Xianxia's blood. It's seeping into the crown prince's bone. Oh my God, it's true. An outrage against the harem, a contamination of the bloodline. All the strength seemed to drain from Xianxia's body. He stumbled backward, barely kept from collapsing by the guards behind him. He lifted his head, his gaze locking onto mine. I watched him silently, my hand resting on my abdomen, my face betraying no emotion. Xianxia's eyes were fixed intently on my hand, protecting my belly. After a long while, He pushed away the guards supporting him and stood up on his own. Your servant, Shen Wei, confesses his guilt. An outrage against the imperial harem, a contamination of the imperial bloodline, these were heinous crimes, punishable by death by slow slicing and the extermination of 9 clans. The verdict was handed down quickly. Shen Wei himself was sentenced to death by slow slicing. All members of the Shen clan, regardless of age or gender, were to be executed, their family property was to be confiscated, and their loyal followers purged without mercy, the night before the execution. Under the protection of several secret guards, I went to the deepest cell in the imperial prison where Shen Wei was being held. The cell reeked of dampness, rot, and blood. Shen Wei sat in the corner, dressed in tattered prisoner's clothes, his hair disheveled, yet his back remained ramrod straight. Hearing footsteps, he looked up. When he saw it was me, a flicker of complex emotion passed through his eyes, then faded into a dead, empty calm. I walked to the cell bars and stared at him silently. He stared back, his gaze finally settling on my still flat abdomen. After a long silence, he spoke suddenly. Your Majesty, your servant has but one final question. Is this child truly of the Shen clan's blood? I neither confirmed nor denied it, simply meeting his gaze calmly. Looking into my unwavering eyes, the last trace of color drained from Shen Wei's face. He seemed to age 10 years in an instant, his shoulders slumping, a sigh escaping his throat. Heh, he laughed softly. A hollow sound. It does not matter, it does not matter. As long as the He clan is brought down. He laughed for a moment, then stopped and lifted his head, his eyes suddenly clear and sharp. Then he told me everything, all the remaining forces of the Shen clan, their secret strongholds, their hidden loyalists. Shen Wei's blood stained the execution ground red. The Shen clan's mansions were sealed with cold, official notices. A once mighty family was reduced to dust in the blink of an eye. Yet the He clan's anticipated outcome, ruling the court unopposed, did not come to pass. The massive power vacuum left by the fall of the Shen clan in the court was not swallowed whole by the He clan. On the contrary, it sparked even fiercer competition among the other factions. The He clan's greed was too blatant, their methods too ruthless. After toppling the Shen clan, they often brushed off or outright rejected the overt and covert requests for profit sharing from other families. I did not need to lift a finger, the sparks of suspicion and resentment ignited all on their own. Yet faced with this chaotic state of affairs, the Empress Dowager behind the beaded curtain remained unflustered. Contrary to what the outside world expected, on this day, the head of the He clan, growing agitated by the joint suppression from several other families, entered the palace once again to seek an audience with the Empress Dowager. Your Highness. Those old codgers from the Wang and Li clans, they have been obstructing our He clan at every turn lately. Shen Wei has only just fallen, and they cannot wait to carve up his territory, not even stopping to consider whether they have the appetite for it. The Empress Dowager let out a soft laugh, setting down her teacup. What is the hurry? They are nothing more than a pack of hyenas scared out of their wits, yet unable to bear seeing others prosper. But, there are no buts. They think that with the Shen clan gone, it is their turn to run amok. I am afraid they have forgotten how their daughters were fortunate enough to conceive dragon seeds and bear those princes and princesses. The Empress Dowager's voice dropped to a whisper. The late emperor, he never had the ability to father children at all. The so-called imperial grace was nothing but a joke. Do these men, fathers of those imperial concubines, truly not know where those children in the harem came from? Shen Wei's scandal has been exposed, but if we were to truly investigate, to examine every case, every detail, can any of their families claim innocence? Even someone as powerful as Shen Wei confessed in the end, did he not? As for the current occupant of the throne, never mind that the woman who gave birth to her has long been dead. Even if she were still alive, with me here, who could force her to reveal anything? Furthermore, even if her bloodline is questionable, with our He clan's power, it would be no more than a minor inconvenience to replace her with another member of the imperial clan. Before long, the court was once again thrown into upheaval. The He clan somehow got hold of irrefutable evidence. accusing the late noble consort Xian of having an affair with her maternal cousin before entering the palace. And as for the second imperial prince's appearance, he looked more and more like his maternal uncle with each passing day. This time, there was no need for the cumbersome trouble of exhuming corpses for paternity testing. The He clan produced both human and material evidence, coupled with the second imperial prince's features, which few could still recall clearly. Their fierce accusations dealt a devastating blow to the Zhao clan. Naturally, the Zhao clan put up a desperate defense, but against the He clan's long-planned offensive, and with the Empress Dowager subtly fanning the flames, their arguments seemed feeble and unconvincing. In the end, the head of the Zhao clan took the initiative to submit a memorial pleading guilty, acknowledging his failure to govern his clan well and educate his daughter properly, and earnestly begged the imperial throne for severe punishment. Several members of the Zhao clan holding official positions in the court were swiftly demoted and exiled from the capital. The Zhao clan's power, which had been locked in a bitter struggle with the He clan for so long, crumbled into dust overnight. The Empress Dowager and the He clan rejoiced in their triumph, basking in the resentful yet obedient and fearful gazes of the other noble families. It was just that they seemed to have forgotten the age-old adage, when cornered, even a rabbit will bite, when pushed to the brink, even a dog will jump over a wall. And what would desperate people do, especially these aristocratic families that had clung to high positions and wielded great power for years, accustomed to holding the fates of others in their hands, when driven to the edge of the cliff with no way left to retreat? Watching their centuries-old family legacies teeter on the verge of destruction, the clash of swords and spears erupted abruptly on an otherwise unremarkable late night. Almost simultaneously, the side and back doors of those once glorious mansions were thrown open, pouring out fully armed family retainers, death squads, and even privately hidden suits of armor and crossbows. Their target was crystal clear: the He clan, the vermilion gates of the He mansion. Under relentless attacks of heavy sledgehammers and flaming oil, did not hold for even half an hour. The din of battle cries and wails of agony tore through the quiet night sky over the capital. A thick stench of blood, mixed with the acrid smell of burning, drifted with the night wind deep into the imperial palace. I stood atop the tallest watchtower, gazing at the towering flames rising in that direction, my face betraying no emotion. Behind me stood a military commander from a poor scholar-official background, who had been promoted amid the power struggles between the He and Shen clans. He knelt on one knee, reporting the current situation to me. "Your Majesty, the He mansion has fallen. Every single member of the He clan, from the highest to the lowest, has been slaughtered to the last soul." I nodded slightly. "What of the palace gates, according to your Majesty's prior arrangements?" "The defending generals at all palace gates have been replaced with our own men. All the internal collaborators that the rebel clans attempted to contact have also been eliminated without a trace. After sacking the He mansion, the rebel troops have split into several groups and are now marching toward the imperial city. They have raised the banner of purging the traitorous ministers around the sovereign, executing the evil Empress Dowager, and restoring order to the imperial court. They claim that your Majesty's bloodline is illegitimate, that your Majesty ascended the throne through deceit, and that they intend to welcome a virtuous imperial clansman to the throne. As expected, the minds of these people all worked the same way: overthrow their rivals, seize power. And as for me, a woman of questionable lineage who had seized the throne through intrigue, she could simply be killed, with the throne left vacant. There would be no shortage of collateral imperial clansmen to take up the mantle. Their calculations were shrewd, but unfortunately, they seemed to have forgotten that thanks to their earlier, near-mad dogfights against the Shen and He clans, my people now held positions of influence both in the military and the court. What's more, I also had the secret agents that Shen Wei had handed over to me at the last moment. As well as that corps of hidden guards who obeyed no orders but the one inscribed on my token, the rebel troops arrived even faster than anticipated. When they caught sight of the imperial guards, fully armed and standing in battle formation before the palace gates, and caught sight of me atop the city wall, the smug grins of triumph on the faces of the leading clan heads finally froze solid. "Loose the arrows, a rain of arrows hailed down from the city wall, throwing the rebel ranks into instant chaos. Almost at the same moment, a much heavier, more orderly thud of footsteps and clatter of horse hooves rang out from behind and on the flanks of the rebel army. It was the troops that were supposed to be stationed at the military camps on the outskirts of the capital, caught in a pincer attack, completely off guard. This uprising, which these clans had regarded as their final gamble to overturn the established order and seize control of the realm, turned out to be nothing more than a ridiculous farce. It slid hastily toward defeat before it had even truly begun its assault on the city, when the darkest hour before dawn passed and the sky began to turn a pale shade of blue-gray. The square before the palace gates was left littered with nothing but the messy, blood-stained bodies of the fallen, of the rebel clan heads. Some had been shot to death by a hail of arrows, turned into pincushions. Others had been trampled to death by their own men in the chaos. Those who were still alive were forced to kneel on the cold flagstones, their faces ashen and devoid of all hope. I descended the city wall step by step, walking across the blood-drenched square until I stood before them. "Your Majesty, spare us, Your Majesty, your subjects." Your subjects acted solely for the sake of the state and the imperial ancestors. An elderly minister with graying hair, tears and snot streaming down his face, kowtowed frantically, purging the traitorous ministers around the sovereign. Your subjects acted to purge the traitorous ministers around the sovereign. I looked down at the dust and blood caked on his forehead, and suddenly found the sight utterly laughable. Purging the traitorous ministers around the sovereign, I repeated the words slowly. And what of me, then, this sovereign of illegitimate bloodline? What exactly did you plan to do with me? He choked violently, his lips trembling uncontrollably, unable to squeeze out a single word in reply. I did not spare him another glance, lifting my feet to continue walking back toward the palace. Lock them all up in the imperial prison, interrogate them thoroughly and exhaustively. All those who participated in this treasonous rebellion, whether they were the ringleaders or their followers, shall be punished severely according to the law. Their entire clans, 3 generations deep, shall be exterminated. The palace of compassion and tranquility remained as quiet as ever, as if the clashing of swords, the screams of the dying, and the towering flames raging beyond the palace walls had nothing to do with this place. The palace door stood slightly ajar. I waved a hand, signaling the hidden guards following behind me to stop at the bottom of the steps, and pushed the door open. Entering alone, only a few oil lamps were lit inside the hall, casting a dim, golden glow over everything. The Empress Dowager, dressed in an elegant set of everyday robes, was sitting on a soft couch by the window, playing a game of chess alone against a half-finished endgame. At the sound of my footsteps, her hand, which had been hovering over a chess piece, paused slightly. But she did not lift her head. "It is over, it is over." I walked over to sit down opposite her. "I underestimated you," she said, dropping the black chess piece in her hand with a crisp click. I shook my head, picking up a white chess piece and placing it on the board. "Mother Empress, in truth, you underestimated yourself. You raised me," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "So how could you have ever thought I would be an obedient puppet?" The Empress Dowager looked at me, staring for a long, long time. Then, suddenly, she smiled. "Good, good," she murmured softly, her tone half praise, half sigh. As she smiled, her brows furrowed slightly, and a thin trickle of dark red blood seeped slowly from the corner of her mouth. She had taken poison long ago. The moment she heard the sounds of battle cries outside the palace walls, the moment she realized I was not the unprepared lamb waiting to be slaughtered she had thought me to be. Or perhaps even earlier, the moment she had decided to join forces with the He clan, to eliminate her political rivals with the cruelest of methods, and to strip me of all my power completely. She had already chosen her own end. If she had won, she would have remained the supreme Empress Dowager, her glory intertwined with that of the He clan. If she had lost, she would never have allowed herself to fall into the hands of the rebel clans, much less live to face my judgment. She lifted a snow-white silk handkerchief, dabbing away the blood at the corner of her mouth with utmost elegance, but fresh blood soon welled up again. staining the handkerchief crimson and soaking through the magnificent patterns embroidered on the front of her robes. The color drained from her face at a visible pace. She forced herself to stay upright, looking at me for the last time. I am sorry. I did not know who she was apologizing to, but as I looked into her eyes, which were slowly losing their light, I nodded gently all the same. You can apologize to my mother in the afterlife. At long last, the morning light pierced through the window lattice completely, falling upon the cold chessboard, upon the interwoven black and white chess pieces, and upon her eyes, which would never open again. I rose to my feet, casting one final glance at this woman who had raised me, used me, and yet had also given me moments of fleeting warmth and shelter. Then I turned and walked out of the palace of compassion and tranquility. Outside the palace hall, the sky had already brightened completely. The morning light was harsh and blinding. I descended the cold white marble steps of the palace of compassion and tranquility step by step. The stench of blood had been somewhat scattered by the wind, but that rust-like smell seemed to have seeped into every single crack between the palace wall bricks and into the very marrow of my bones. Someone hurried up behind me, then fell silent, keeping half a step behind. Your Majesty, all the traitorous rebels have been arrested and imprisoned. The treasures, private soldiers, suits of armor, and secret correspondence seized from their respective mansions are currently being inventoried. Of the 7 clan heads who led the rebellion, 4 are dead and 3 are captured. Here is the list of the remaining accomplices who colluded with them. He held out a scroll of silk inscribed with names. I did not take it, my eyes fixed on the eerily empty square stretching out before me. Handle it according to the law. Execute those who deserve execution. Exile those who deserve exile. Exterminate the clans of those who deserve clan extermination. There is no need to come to me again for instructions. In the days that followed, the capital was soaked in blood. The blue flagstones at the Kaishaku execution ground were scrubbed over and over again, yet the stench of blood lingered stubbornly, refusing to be washed away. The heads of over 100 members of the 7 rebel clans and their colluders fell to the executioner's blade. Thousands more were exiled to the remote and desolate borderlands. Once glorious aristocratic mansions became haunted houses overnight, their plaques torn down and trampled to pieces. Their wealth confiscated and incorporated into the state treasury. Half of the court seats were left vacant. The remaining officials became even more cautious and timid in their words and deeds, fearing that one wrong step would make them follow in the footsteps of the executed traitors. I began to fill the court vacancies bit by bit with my own trusted men. Those poor scholar officials who had been exiled to remote border regions in the first imperial examination after my ascension were recalled one by one via secret imperial edicts. They returned, bringing with them the skills and experience they had honed defending the frontier, to fill the vacancies in the 6 ministries, the censorate, and even the regional prefectures and counties. They had shallow family backgrounds, possessing nothing in the world except for the imperial favor I had bestowed upon them. They were my sharpest blades and my most loyal ministers, but even so, there were still not enough men to fill all the positions in the court. Thus, it was only natural that a new imperial examination was held. On the day the examination results were announced, the capital was even more bustling than it was during the New Year celebrations. Imperial announcement scrolls plastered all 4 city walls, the names written in vermilion ink crammed densely together, stretching as far as the eye could see. Tea houses and wine shops erupted in a cacophony of noise. Those who had failed the exam pounded their chests and stamped their feet in frustration. Those who had passed burst into tears of joy, and the vast majority of the crowd pressed together, craning their necks to stare up at those unfamiliar names, flames of envy and ambition burning brightly in their eyes. Look, that's my townsman. His family was so poor they only owned 3 mu of barren farmland, and yet he managed to pass the highest imperial examination. His Majesty is truly a ruler who does not stick to conventions when selecting talent. I heard the palace examination will be held in 3 days' time, and His Majesty will personally preside over it. If I could catch a glimpse of His Majesty's divine countenance and be personally selected by His Majesty, I would die without regret. The joy and excitement of the examination results announcement rose up from the streets and alleys, diluting the oppressive atmosphere of bloodshed that had hung over the capital for months on end. 3 days later, the palace examination commenced. Dressed in a grand imperial court robe, I sat upright upon the lofty throne in the golden hall. My lower abdomen had already begun to show a slight bulge, cleverly concealed beneath the layers of elaborate royal robes. Below the throne, the newly admitted palace examination scholars knelt in a dark, dense mass, clad in identical blue robes. Most of them were young men, their faces etched with a mixture of nervousness, excitement, and an almost devout sense of agitation. My gaze swept slowly over their faces. These faces were unfamiliar, rugged, some still bearing the marks of years of hard labor. Among them, some would grow into capable and upright officials, some would sink into mediocrity, and others might even harbor ulterior motives in the days to come. But at this moment, they knelt here, at my feet. Their future, their lives, their honor and disgrace, all hinged on my sole will. That was more than enough. I gently caressed my lower abdomen. I did not know who the father of this child truly was, but none of that mattered. At the very least, I knew she was absolutely my child. That is the story I have to share with you today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll see you in the next video.